I'm Alfred Smith, and I was born in Christiansburg, Virginia in 1947. So essentially I've lived here in Blacksburg all my life, except for 2 years that after we graduated from Virginia Tech, we went to Manassas and taught for 2 years, and that's about all we could stand in Manassas. Just too much traffic up there, so we moved back here to Blacksburg to help build the new high school. Raynard Hale, the superintendent at that time, called us and asked us if we were ready to come home, and so we moved back here, and I've lived here all my life.
I'm John Kline. I'm not a native. I've lived here for about 57, 58 years, but we moved here in 56. I think the first night in Blacksburg, we stayed at the Colonial Hotel, Colonial Inn, is that?
Colonial Hotel.
Colonial Hotel. It was right downtown in the center of town, and directly behind it was the grade school, first grade. And you know, you walked across that field, which later I had my business there. So I feel like I've been here for a long time, and I hope to be here a lot longer.
I grew up on, my home was on Upland Road, which is right off South Main Street, right up from the high school that I attended, and always rode my bicycle to school every day. We were able to raise chickens then, so my grandmother and I raised chickens, and I raised pheasants. My dad and I always raised rabbit beagles, and I took an old clawfoot bathtub out of the house when Dad remodeled it, buried it in the backyard, and raised goldfish in it year-round. And that house was put up for sale about a month ago because my cousin lived in it, and she's going into a nursing home, and the house is going up for sale. My clawfoot bathtub is still buried in that backyard, and I can't decide whether to go dig it up or not, but can't imagine what it's like now. But that's where I grew up, was in downtown, basically downtown Blacksburg at that time.
John, where did you live?
Well, I raised a lot of things. I raised a lot, to be quite honest. But it wasn't chickens at the time. I was real fortunate. We lived in Airport Acres on Rose Avenue, and that was a great place to live. I mean, you had kids everywhere there, from, I remember the Taylors, the Jacksons, the Kings, the Lowrys. I mean, they're just the Pattersons. I mean, the Pattersons were there with their dog Patrick, and we all had pets. We had a cat that, I swear that cat was 14 years old and had about 120 kittens. But you know, my mother taught first grade Beulah Kline, so finding homes for kittens was never any problem. I mean, it was a great place to grow up. You'd have a baseball game every day. When it snowed, they'd close the street off. You'd go sledding down the hill on Rose Avenue, and everybody'd be around. They'd block the streets off. I mean, we had some snows in 56 to 58. I think we went without school for what, about 3 weeks one time in 58. Anyway, Rose Avenue, Airport Acres was just a great place to grow up. All kinds of kids around there to play, and I mean, I have very fond memories of the Sandy Airfield Base was right behind us. The airport, the Huckleberry, the train would come from downtown, would actually go through Sandy, and they called the Huckleberry at the time, it was the Huckleberry because it was so slow that you could jump on and jump off and pick huckleberries and jump back on. Well, trust me, as a kid growing up right off Airport Acres, we jumped on that train many times.
As far as recreation, how I spent my extra time as a child in Blacksburg, of course, I guess my first date was here in the Lyric Theater. So the Lyric was the place for all kids to go from whenever you were able to go with your parents, and then after you graduated from your parents, that's where you took your group or your date. That's where I took my wife on our first date. But basically, I was involved so much with the Blacksburg High School sports, Virginia Tech sports, and I can remember my family every Friday and Saturday nights would have rook games in our house. I can always remember the Strickler family was always very popular with the group that would come over, and of course my biggest passion then and still now was fishing and hunting with my dad. From, like I said, we raised rabbit beagles, and so I'd been hunting and fishing ever since I was able to crawl. And I guess my dad always called it recreation, or let's go do something fun. And of course, he was a A.H. Smith building contractor here in town for years, and his idea of recreation was going and working on somebody's house. And so that's what I did every summer. And he was very proud of the fact that every summer he would always hire 10 to 12 high school students to help him with his construction business. And those students still today, when they were my classmates, and when we have class reunions or when I just communicate with them, they still bring up stories about working for my dad and how much they hated part of it and hated it then, but kind of like with some of the teachers that you don't appreciate when you have them after you're out into the world or furthering your education, you realize how much you learned from those experiences, from those people pushing you and yelling at you at times and telling you when you do wrong and how to do it right. So, but that was basically my recreation was sports and hunting and fishing with my friends, and my classmates were involved in most all of those things.
I enjoyed downtown. I always enjoyed downtown. I mean, I remember, I wasn't much of a student. I remember skipping school from the old grade school, and you'd crawl under the Strubles Creek where it goes across, like you're going over to not the SAB, where the University Club is now, the building there. What's the name of that building? The old Alumni Hall. Strubles Creek would go underneath the road there. Well, we'd be playing in the back. This is right downtown where the grade school and, well, before that it was the grade school and the high school, but it was the grade school was there then, and you could play in the back, the big playground in the back, but right behind it, you could go out, you could get off of school property very easily. Go over to the SAB, Student Activity Building. Well, you could get hot dogs for 15 cents and, Coke for a nickel. Or you could go to Meredith Restaurant downtown. I think it was later called the Crow's Nest. And you could play pinball for a nickel. Now, very fond memories playing pinball, especially if you're skipping school at lunchtime and then sneaking back in and nobody knowing about it. Now, those are fine memories. The Lyric Theater, this was a great place. I mean, back then, everybody watched the movies. Now, sometimes we'd be known to watch movies backwards. Now, let's say, how do you do that? Well, see, right back at this door, right back here, you could get in that back door, and you could get behind the screen, and you could sit down, there's a couch there, and you could watch those movies backwards until Mr. Kelsey found out about it. Now, when Mr. Kelsey would find out about it, trust me, Frankie or whoever was here, you'd be out of here in no time.
Well, when you paid to come in, did you sit downstairs or in the balcony?
This wasn't paying to come in.
I say, if you paid to come in, did you sit downstairs or up in the
Oh, we'd
balcony?
always go up in the balcony. You'd have to go up in the balcony.
Yeah, we
'cause
did some things up there that probably shouldn't talk about.
I know it, like throwing a football across the field.
We threw
Yeah,
other
well,
things
other
over
things,
the
yeah,
balcony,
yeah. I probably did that too.
But that was,
But the theater downtown, it was the place, and all the stores downtown Blacksburg. I mean, back then you had, let's see, you had at least 4 hardware stores. You know, you had Mr. Burris, Blacksburg Hardware. You had Rogers Hardware. You had the Western Auto, Mr. Harden. Blacksburg Lumber Company, I think was Mr. Lipsy.
yeah,
Mr. Absher had the
paint shop.
paint shop across the street from that. So, you know, you had plenty of hardware stores. You had drug stores. A drugstore then was, it wasn't like it is now. A drugstore, it always had the counter.
Go there
you'd
and eat
to
and drink and get your
Tech
drugs.
Drug Store. I remember Louise at Tech Drug Store and
Yes.
Mr. Lucas. And, you know, you go in there, and I'd always go in and get a pimento cheese with olive sandwich on it. And I charged it to my mother. Told him with my lunch. So, you know, lunches were $0.25, so as long as you didn't spend over $0.25, I mean, it really wasn't hurting anything. But the Coke probably wasn't a good idea.
Well, when you mentioned pimento cheese, my favorite place to eat pimento cheese was Sally Oliver's Bluegrass Market.
Oh my goodness, Sally Oliver is
And I'm
great.
still trying to get Larry Linkus, because Larry Linkus was just, Larry's a little bit older than I am. And he
Yeah.
was working for Sally Oliver, and Linda, my wife, is still trying to get Larry to give us the recipe to their pimento cheese. All Larry will tell us is that it was whatever cheese we had left over in hunks or laying in the counter, that's what we used to use her to make her pimento cheese. But I think Linda lived off of that
Yeah.
in her school lunches because it was so good. But every morning, that's when the high school that's no longer up there on South Main, when we were going to high school there, every morning our tradition with Paul Perdue and I, one of my classmates, every morning, regardless of what Mom fed me for breakfast, which was usually a raspberry biscuit, raspberry jam and biscuit, but we would always go down to Sally Oliver's and get a Dr. Pepper and a bag of peanuts. Of course, you poured the bag of peanuts in the Dr. Pepper, and then you consumed that on your way back up to school before school would start. So that, when you mention pimento cheese, that's my pimento cheese.
Now, was this
place.
when Mr. Oliver had his grocery downtown, or was it up where Mr. Dillon had his grocery store?
It's in the old building that's up here right now. That's going to be the
Right,
Browns whatever,
Brownstone.
Brownstone. Yeah.
He was downtown. He was closer to the underground, where the underground is now. First, before that.
He was right close. He was closer.
Right.
He moved up there to get closer to high school students because
Right.
he knew we would come. We would come down there.
I used to go to the downtown stores quite a bit. And like I was saying, we had the 4 hardware stores, we had at least 3 drug stores, we had 3 men's shops, we had at least 2 women's stores. We had a Rose's 5 and 10 dime store. The first one was right on the corner. Remember, you'd go in by the Lyric, the one side
Yes.
on College Avenue, and you'd come out on Main Street, right around corner drugstore, around it was where Rogers was, or right next to it. You'd come out the street there. I remember running through that from one end with my buddy Robert Banks, and we'd run in one side, run down past the 2 sisters, the Sink sisters that were in the candy department. Well, sometimes there might have been a piece of candy missing, but we'd be on out the door, and I did enjoy downtown. What else do we have downtown then?
Well, going back to my childhood, one of my favorite places was G.W. Hill and Sons grocery store.
Oh, yeah.
Our
I know that.
basically country store that's up on the
top
hill
hill.
that's still in, it was my grandfather's and it was my father's, and now Linda and I are handling it. But back then it was basically a general store.
I miss a general store.
You know,
I think that's a great
my
thing.
grandfather was
Still
a
need
meat
one.
cutter and had the grocery store in one side, and then you walk through little archways to the other part, and my two aunts ran they called it the dry goods section, but they had sold shoes, and they sold women's clothing and men's clothing in that part. And then when my dad bought the building in 1947, he added, it used to be a hotel, and they called it the House on the Hill. And he turned the upstairs apartment, it was rooms upstairs, but he turned them into 3 apartments upstairs. But I can remember spending a lot of time in that grocery store because I was just amazed when they would unload the beef or the hogs, and watching my grandfather cut up the meat and sell fresh meat, and got to meet a lot of, well, like I say, it was just an old country store, which to me meant a lot. Of course, we had the A&P downtown. I don't know when Radford Brothers started on North End.
Let's see,
but
Mr. Cole had A&P, didn't he?
Yes.
And then
Yes.
across the street, when was Piggly Wiggly? It was downtown at one time, across where was it where Big Al's is, or is it up the street? Straight?
I think it's pretty close on the block that Big Al's.
I think it is. I have pictures showing. That's where I see most of my pictures. Most of my stuff now is I'll see an old picture of downtown, and you'll study it. You'll look in the window. I mean, in the signs on it, and you'll see who was there. I think of all the stores downtown, the one that was always the most amazing was Blacksburg Hardware upstairs. Now, you know what was upstairs. If you go in Champs right now, the downstairs, and you'll see that old elevator, well, the elevator went upstairs to the toy department, and Mrs. Burris they wouldn't open that but Christmas, maybe a month before Christmas. Well, Buddy Robert and I, we decided one day we were going to get in a little early. So we went in there and we got in that elevator, and you had to pull the ropes to get you up there. We got up there to the top, and I mean, all these toys, everything up there. Mrs. Burris heard us up there. Oh my goodness, boy, we got a good one. You get out of here, this is Christmas. That was a fine store.
Well, I know those were the eating places, in grocery stores downtown. Did you ever spend any time at Tech Drive-In?
Very little, but yes,
Very
I know
little.
what Tech.
That was very popular for me and my dates. We would go to Tech Drive-In on South End. North End would always be Pete's Drive-In on North End.
Golden Gobbler.
And then Paul Perdue and his family had the place out on top of out on North Main, which were pretty close to where the hospital is now. But Paul could make the best milkshakes of anybody I knew. So we would date together, and then after we take our dates home, we would go out there, and Paul would fix us.
Sports Center, remember that?
Yes. Yep. Did you ever go in the Golden Gobbler?
Golden Gobbler, many times. The TDC at the Sports Center. Now that's still where Mike's is now. That was a burger to remember. And I know one down just a little bit past that. I don't think I was allowed to go in there until I was maybe 16. Cromer's, what was that place called? Mr. Cromer had it. Cecil's.
I thought you. Well, I was going to say. I thought you.
I'd sneak into Cecil's.
You're way out on Cecil's, out on North Main Street.
And I mean, you could get 3-2 beer It had the green top to it at 18, I believe. Well, shoot, by the time I was 18, we could get the real stuff. Anyway, that was a fine place to remember.
Because, some of the,
That was
I
the
guess-
first place that sold alcohol in
I think
Blacksburg.
it was. I think it was. Legally, yes.
Legally, right. Oh, well, of course, now, you know who was great about
They had an
telling,
ABC sign, anyway.
yeah, telling stories about that was Mrs. Hummel. Mrs. Hummel would grab me by the arm and say, "Come on, John, let me show you where this stuff is, where this used to be." And I'd argue with her a lot about it, but she was used 99% of the time she was right. But she'd tell me about, the only way you could get a drink on for the weekend is Thursday night you were feeling bad, you had a cough, and you'd have to go over to see Doc Mangus. Now, Doc Mangus on Thursday, he'd give you the formula prescription, and you'd go over to one of the drug stores, Corner Drug, Tech Drug, and you'd get the formula. You'd get your prescription. Well, it's straight liquor, it just.
Made you feel better, though,
That's
didn't
how
it?
you get your
Made you feel
medicine
better.
for the weekend, right? Because we didn't have alcohol. I mean, you couldn't even get a beer in town limits. What, till in the 60s, wasn't it? Early 60s? I don't remember
Somewhere
when.
around there. Well, if I went to the doctor, I'd have to, I'd have only doctor I can really remember who used to come to my bedroom to see me when I was a child would be Dr. Boatwright.
Boatwright, yeah.
And if I needed to see him after and I could get out of the house, if he wasn't in his Blacksburg office, then we drove to Newport for his office that he had in Newport. Dr. Boatwright, and I think his partner then was Dr. Stafford.
Yep, I
and,
remember Dr. Boatwright.
And he was just an icon and somebody that I'll remember all of my life. Another person in town that influenced me and we had just had a lot of fun. He and my dad had a lot of fun together. Was Chief Danny Roach, and
I think I met him several times.
well, the one thing
He was
that
a good guy, though. He
the
was,
one
really
thing I
was.
can remember about one story I remember about Danny Roach was he came to our house one night and just because, like I say, he was one of our rook playing families too, and he lived on our street there on Upland Road for a while, and he came and invited Dad to go with him to shoot rats. So he asked Dad if he had a .22. So of course, Danny had his .38 police special, and we went down and they invited me to go too, and we went down to the town dump, down on Toms Creek Road. Went up to the dump in the police car, and he would take the spotlights on the police car and just shine them on all the trash, and I was just flabbergasted with the amount of rats that were there. So I guess that's how he did his practice target shooting.
I guess.
But Dad would use his .22 pistol, Danny would use his .38 special, and they eventually started letting me use my little .22 rifle when I would go with them. But I'll never forget us doing that. You remember who your first grade teacher was?
Certainly.
Mine was Mrs. Trotter. I'll never forget her.
Mine was Mrs. Bonner.
And I think all of us probably remember those people. The superintendent that's responsible for my career here as principal at the high school, I guess, was Raynard Hale, which is just a phenomenal icon here in Blacksburg and Montgomery County. I don't think I've ever been to a funeral at the funeral homes for anybody of my friends or relatives or whatever that I don't see Mr. Hale there. He's just one of the best people and dedicated people that I've ever been associated with. When I was in school, and I got to know the Kip sisters because I had them as teachers. And then after I got out and found out where the nice farmhouse that they lived in, we approached them about rabbit hunting on their property. So we would go down and rabbit hunt on the Kipps farm, and got to. Then when Linda moved here from Lexington, Kentucky, and we started dating, got married, we would still visit them down there. And I'll never forget, before we moved to Manassas to start teaching, I can't remember which one of them was, but I'll never forget her saying, it says, just remember as a teacher now, the way you make your bed for the first 9 days of school is the way you're going to have to sleep in it for the next 9 months. So whatever you do the first 9 days is the way your class is going to go for the next 9 months. But they were just phenomenal people, and meant a lot to me, not just in school, but as visiting them after they had retired. And Larry Linkus, again, now lives in that farmhouse down on off of Price's Fork Road, and I guess some other people that that I can't forget. Bill Brown, my baseball coach in high school, was always just such a tremendous coach to me, teacher, my PE teacher, and I got hurt playing baseball one time, and I think it hurt him more than it hurt me. He came to my house, visiting me at my house, and I just had so much respect for him. And after I became an administrator at Blacksburg High School, Bill was still there teaching, so that was kind of strange. And Jerry Claiborne, Virginia Tech football coach back during my early days. Linda, my wife, and her family knew him in Kentucky, and so that was a family affair. And so Jerry Claiborne and my family was always, they meant a lot to us too, and had a lot of stories there.
I remember the teachers a little different. I remember Mr. Gray all the time, Ducky. Mr. Gray was a great principal. And every time I go to the reunions, I see Mr. Gray, Mr. Quisenberry, Mr. Wiley, Alan Wiley. I used to photograph all the sports events, and I'd go to different schools and photograph them. And that, I think that helped. I really always tried to get out of school. I wasn't crazy about it, but I'd leave early sometimes. We used to go to Pandapis Pond. It was just a coincidence, I guess. It was right at last period, so that was phys ed. Well, we'd leave school early and go swimming at Pandapis Pond. And well, Mr. Wiley one time, he told me, he said, well, you're probably getting more exercise there than you are here at school, so,
Did he have his cigar in his mouth?
He sure did. And I that probably helped me get those pictures. Even one time I was taking pictures at one of the games, I think it was in Pulaski, and they took my camera, and they said, you aren't allowed to photograph these basketball games. I said, well, why not? And I said, I'm photographed and I'm trying to sell them to the parents of the Pulaski, ball players. I said, I wasn't thinking about anything taking from Blacksburg High School. Well, they took me down to the police station. I called my dad up, and my dad said, well, he's just out trying to make a living, trying to make some extra money selling pictures, And he got all upset about it, but, I get home by midnight, and we're all right. But, I was talking to Mr. Gray and Mr. Quisenberry at one of these reunions I was at, and I said, I think I saw these two men more than anybody else in school. The two is usually in their own office, That was, I liked Blacksburg. Great school. We had some really fine teachers, Mr. Turner. I'll never forget Bob Turner. He was great. He was this man was an artist, and I mean, he'd throw a muddy straight eraser across the room if you dozed off during the class, but he could draw crustaceans or anything you wanted up on the chalkboard, and you'd remember it. I remember making a rocket once from one end of the old grade school, 7th grade. See, we had 1st through 3rd in the old building up here, which is the grade school. The middle was Quonset Hut. That was our middle school, which also had the cafeteria underneath it. Remember those rolls? And then you had the 5th, 6th, and 7th grade in the old high school building downtown.
And they're all still right here behind
Oh,
us.
yeah, still here. See, we've lost 2 other schools since then, but the old one still
Right.
stands up. Yeah, I tell
Yep.
you. Something
Yep.
about that, isn't it?
There's something to
But
be
we
said
made a
there.
rocket that went from one end of that room, the hallway, to the other and smashed against the wall, and I thought it was amazing. I did take it to a science fair, but
Well, when you mentioned Mr. Quisenberry,
Red Dog.
he was Red Dog. That's what we called him. He was my industrial arts teacher
Oh,
along with Frank West.
Mr. West.
And those two gentlemen, I guess, probably determined my teaching career because of course, growing up with my dad, a building contractor, it was already in my blood to work with wood and metals and everything else and drafting. And so they influenced my career and basically convinced me to go to Virginia Tech and major in industrial arts. So both of those gentlemen influenced and got me headed in that direction. But why do you think Blacksburg is called a special place? Why is it special to you?
I mean, I've been through a lot. It is a special place.
Yeah.
I like Blacksburg. See, I've been involved in sales I've had my store for 37 years, and I was downtown before that. I've only left Blacksburg. I went in the service for 2 years. I went to Spain during Vietnam era, and I was so lucky. And I went to Virginia Western for a couple of years. I was gone. I really didn't leave, but I was gone for 2 years then. But I've lived in Blacksburg basically since '56, all my life, except for those 2 years in Spain. And I've always come back. You know, it's a great place. People and the memories, just the people are the big thing in Blacksburg. You can always count on other people to help you. It's amazing how many people are still around from our class. Every time we have a high school reunion, I mean, we get 75 to 90% that still are.
Ours is the same way, and a lot of those people wish they were back here or are in the process of moving back to Blacksburg. You know, I guess the community atmosphere, the caring atmosphere. Of course, I'm being a member of I'm a life member of the Volunteer Rescue Squad and the fire department. I joined that in '71 when I moved back from Manassas. I was only gone 2 years to teach in Manassas, and then I came back. But I've been involved with the rescue squad and the fire department ever since. And I was, back in my younger days, I was a lieutenant and group leader with the rescue squad. And after 25 years of that, I kind of had, and once I became principal of the high school, I had to kind of give up getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning to go help somebody. But I did that for 25 years. And I guess that tradition in Blacksburg still exists, although back then both groups were together. The fire and rescue were together. Now they're separate groups, and primarily that happened, I was the last president when both groups were together, and I guess primarily the separation happened because things started becoming so, the training and that was required for rescue and for fire started getting so specialized, and that there's no way you could keep up in training with both of them, or if you did, you didn't have much of a life outside of that. So being a principal and trying to do both, I just couldn't do that anymore. But I think Blacksburg is special to me with that regard, because when you still, if I'm able to help out in a small capacity, I still go to every meeting now and try to stay as involved as I possibly can with the business aspects of it, and doing everything I can to help support them. But it's amazing how many people that move to Blacksburg, and some who have lived here for a while, do not realize that those organizations are completely volunteer. Because the first thing a lot of them will ask you when you go to pick them up is, how much is this going to cost me? Nothing. And a lot of them can't understand that. And a town our size, with a major university right here, to be able to offer the citizens of Blacksburg and surrounding Montgomery County volunteer rescue and fire service is just phenomenal. That is special. That happens nowhere that I know of.
My parents always had international students come over to our house. I mean, every Sunday. I was the token American. I mean, they'd come over and we'd have 15 people. I mean, that's every Sunday. I mean, that's why people ask me if I have a tailgate for 150 people. No big deal. Used to it. I mean, my mother we'd have Japanese students living downstairs. My dad would have them out in the garden. Every time it rained, they'd be out there pulling weeds, and he just loved that. And cooking different things. I don't think there's a food that I don't like. I mean, I've been exposed to every type of food there is, and I've tried to cook every type of food there is too, but we've always had international students, so that's part of Blacksburg. I mean, if you live in this town and you don't interact with all the international students that we have here, you're missing half the ball game. We've had goats in the backyard that the Africans made their stew with, and my son tried to release the goat one time that they did that. That was a fun time, but I've enjoyed that part of it for the being exposed to that, because there are a lot of people that haven't been. I know we could probably talk all afternoon.
We are. All right, getting back to the fire department. You remember how we used to alert the members that there was a call?
Sure, the whistle, the home siren.
All right.
Oh, let's see.
You remember the difference now?
Oh, one was a fire and one was a rescue. I think
Steam
so.
whistle at the power plant at Virginia Tech. If you heard that, it was a fire call. And of course, they would alternate that with the sirens on the poles on Main Street.
Right, okay.
For rescue call, it would just be the sirens on Main Street. And I can remember both of my uncles were involved in and I can remember when that would go off. My father would leave. He was a charter member of the rescue squad, and he and my uncle Wes, we both lived in the same house on Upland Road, and every time that would go off, I mean, everybody went. It wasn't, you didn't have groups, because we didn't have that many people, but when those things, and I often thought, when Tech was trying to think about how can we alert students that there's something going on and you need to lock yourselves down or lock down or whatever, I keep thinking about that steam whistle that we used to blow over there that you could hear almost
now, where
all
is
over.
that steam whistle? I'd like to know about that.
Well, it was, I don't know how they blew it. I just know when they blew it, steam came out.
I
and it would go, woo, woo. I mean, it was, you could hear it everywhere, and I often thought, I don't know what happened to it or whether it's still feasible or not, but I do know the sirens. The only one that's left is on top of the firehouse downtown, and I guess the last time I heard it blown was 2 summers ago at my father's funeral. We took the procession, we took a little detour up to the cemetery, and we went by the firehouse, and they blew that siren for him.
Well, that's neat.
So I know we've kept it operable so that we can blow it whenever it's appropriate or whenever we need to let somebody know that something is going on. But that was in the. What do you remember about your high school days? That anything? I know I can remember as first time I was really able to go out of Virginia. I went on our senior trip, and we had our choice of going to a play or going to watch the Yankees play ball. And Mrs. Hummel took, I guess it was I don't know which group. In other words, it was not my group. That group went to see the play. My group went with Bob Price to the Yankee ball game.
Yeah.
And just walking from the hotel to Yankee Stadium in downtown New York City and seeing the people laying on, that was my first vision of homeless people laying on the sidewalks. You didn't know whether they were dead or alive, couldn't tell. I can still, that just was in my mind so much. And when Bob Price got us to the ball game, I probably shouldn't say what some of the activities that he allowed us to participate in for the first time at a ball game, but that was a very vivid eye opener for me as to what life was like outside of little country Blacksburg, small Blacksburg. I'd always, Blacksburg to me is the perfect place to raise a family, raise children. The educational system has always been outstanding. I've been involved with it all my life. I may be a little biased, but I think it's a tremendous educational system, regardless of which superintendent was here. I often told my faculty, we don't need a superintendent and you don't need a principal, because the faculty that was there, as good as they were, I knew that the program would, and Blacksburg High School was always in the top 50 in the United States the whole time I was there, which, when you think about that, that's quite an accomplishment.
Right.
For a little place like this. But that's.
I remember my senior trip too. I think our class had the honor of being the last senior trip.
Wonder.
I
was
think
there a
it
reason?
was. We had a good time in Washington and New York, and I think Mr. Price went with us too. It was. I'm sure it was an eye opener for many people. Yeah, that was a good one.
Well, Mr. Price he was one of the most advocating teachers for students that I ever worked with. I had a concerned citizen call my office one day and say, do you know there's some students down at Hardee's or Wendy's, I forget which one it was. And I said, no, but I will watch for them to come back into the parking lot. So I went down and waited. In a few minutes, here comes Mr. Price's old green pickup truck. Comes driving up, parks in the faculty parking lot. 4 students hop out of it. And they've got their bags of food, and so I kind of follow them back, and they go back to Mr. Price's room. So I didn't say anything to them, and I called Bob up after school and asked him if he knew where his truck was at lunchtime. And he kind of grinned, like Bob would do, and said, yeah, and I guess you do too, or you wouldn't be asking me. And so I told him, and he said, well, those kids, he said, they don't get anything for breakfast at home. and they don't have any money to buy lunch, so I just let them use my truck to go down and get their lunch, and I paid for it. And I guess I did wrong. But how do you tell somebody, yeah, you did wrong? But all I said to him was, well, you know what's going to happen if something happens to those kids on the way. But the least you could have done is they could have brought me a Frosty or a milkshake. That's the least could happen. So help me. About 2 weeks later, Frances Tate, my secretary out front, she knocked on my door and she said, some student just brought this by and said this was compliments of Bob Price's class, and it was a chocolate milkshake. But Bob was a special. He was definitely a people's person.
I think the town is, I mean, it's a great town. We got a long way to go right now. I mean, I'm not too pleased with the downtown, the way it's turning out, but it's all gonna work out. We're gonna have a lot more parks and benches and areas that you can relax in. I'm very concerned about business in Blacksburg in the next 10 years. I mean, all we have are not all we have, but we have a lot of restaurants and bars. Like to see more retail, but it has to work out one way or another, or we're going to be paying for it.
Well, the building, like I say, that's been in my family up beside of the building on the hill up there. The town has, the processes took a long time to get in place, but they helped me a good bit. The end result has been tremendous in that I now have 3 businesses up there, none of which are restaurants.
Right.
With apartments over top for student housing, and the town has helped me go through that process. It took a long time, but we eventually got there. But one thing I think that we have left out is the car situation. That I know you're involved with cars, and of all the students that have gone through Blacksburg High School, when they see me out now, one of the first things that they ask me, do you still have your 65 GTO? And it just amazes me that all of them remember that, and I tell them, yes, I do. I'm in the process of restoring it, and I know you're in the car business, selling cars. So that was, I guess, when I graduated from high school, I bought that 65 GTO, and I drove it to school, kept it at school for a while, and a lot of the students still remember that as that. But other than that, I guess one of the things that I'm most proud of as a citizen of Blacksburg is that I went to Blacksburg High School as a student, and I did well enough to get into Virginia Tech, and then I was able to come back and, like Mr. Gray, being a student, and then come back and being a principal of the school that you were a student of is very rare, very unique, tough at times, and especially in the beginning. But Blacksburg High School was my life, and it from all the way from a student all the way till I retired in '05. So education was probably very, very important to me in Blacksburg, and still is, and I still substitute for principals in the county when they need some assistance. I helped them with the move when the gymnasium collapsed and they needed some help moving. They called me and asked if I would help, and I'm so glad that they did that, because I wanted to help any way that I possibly could. So I've enjoyed it here.
I've enjoyed Blacksburg, and I collect pictures of Blacksburg, and that kind of lets me get into all different groups, all ages. When I see an old picture, I try to research the old picture, where it was, when it was, and I can talk to groups on Blacksburg and just about anything if I bring up my pictures. And that's really helped a lot. A lot of the families, I have all kinds of pictures at the store that I've loaned out. We put them on our website. I hope this museum takes off someday so we can get a place to put some of this stuff.
Well,
I've got so much junk, junk hay in my store.
as a lot of people, a lot of the classes, when they have the reunions, will call me or donate stuff. I have my garage, my dad's garage, my basement. I have it full of Indian stuff that I understand we're going to have a room in the museum once we get it finished for Indian stuff to take place. So and I'm anxious to get it out of my garage and out of my basements because some of the stuff is rather large. And but I'm hoping that will take place. And but other than being principal of the high school and being a student there, I guess I can also attribute. That's where I met my wife, and Linda's been a major part of my life ever since they moved here in '63. So and we raised our kids here. One is still here as a deputy sheriff, Drew. Keeley is in Maryland, working, and is expecting a granddaughter of mine next month. So I'm anxiously
That's great.
looking forward to bringing that one to Blacksburg. So I've enjoyed it. We can go back to your shop and look at all those pictures, or we can go to lunch again.
Play my slot machine,
Well, that was the first time I've seen the slot machine was a while ago.
I was out at Blacksburg. See, I've got a lot of things from the museum too,
But enjoyed it, John.
See.
Thank you. Glad you're still here.
Oh yeah.